All right, so today we're going to dive deep right into the life and crimes of a guy named Shawn Grate. Real piece of work, serial killer who was terrorizing Ohio for over a decade. And we're working with some excerpts from his Wikipedia page. And let me tell you, this guy's something else, man.
Oh, yeah.
He wrote letters from prison blaming, get this, government assistance
Yeah.
for his victims' deaths.
Wow. That's certainly a way to try and shift the blame, I guess. It'll be interesting to see what we can find out about his psyche.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh,
Okay, so Shawn Grate, born 1976, Marion, Ohio. Normal childhood, seemingly on the surface, played sports, had friends. But just like a lot of these cases, there are cracks in the facade.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It seems like the sources highlight some early academic struggles. He even had to repeat kindergarten and first grade. And then at age 6, his parents divorced. And I mean, these disruptions, that can be really traumatic for a kid.
No kidding. And
Yeah.
It gets worse. At 11, his mother abandons the family. And this seems like a recurring theme we see. It's serial killers, this absent or neglectful mother. Is there some sort of like psychological link there? Or is that just kind of like a cliche we've come to expect?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely more nuanced than just a cause and effect, right?
Yes.
But I mean, these early experiences of neglect and just emotional detachment, I mean, those can definitely leave some really deep scars. And in fact, one of his high school girlfriends described him having like these periods of withdrawal. She said he would like lay on the couch for days.
Yeah, and it's eerie, right?
Yeah.
Almost like he was retreating into himself, like creating this world where he has control. Am I reading too much into that, or is there something there?
No, I mean, perhaps not. Later a psychiatrist would actually end up linking this behavior back to that early neglect. And that kind of raises an interesting question. Could these periods of withdrawal be like an early manifestation of the control issues that would later define his crimes?
Yeah, that's a great point. So we have this troubled childhood, but
Yeah.
how does that translate into actually harming others? I mean, it's a big leap from being a withdrawn kid to becoming a serial killer.
Oh, yeah, you're right. It's very rarely a direct path. There's usually this gradual descent into criminality. So like age 20, he gets his first burglary conviction, gets a 4-year sentence, but ends up being released early.
Oh, really? Early release, huh? Is that a missed opportunity? Could more time served have like changed his trajectory? Or was he already on this path to violence no matter what?
Yeah. That's a question for the criminologists and sociologists out there, right? Did the system fail to rehabilitate him? Or was he just beyond redemption at that point? But regardless, shortly after his release, in 2006, he actually commits his first known murder.
That's the turning point, right?
Yeah.
He crosses the line from property crime to actually taking a human life. Do we know anything about this first victim?
Unfortunately, the sources are pretty scant on the details of this early murder. But what we do know is that over the next decade, Grate would claim the lives of at least 5 women.
5 women. That's 5 individual tragedies, 5 families ripped apart. Let's talk about them, not just as statistics, but as individuals.
Absolutely, it's really crucial to remember the human cost of Grate's actions. So we'll start with the case that ultimately led to his capture. A woman we'll call Jane Doe, a 38-year-old woman. Her 911 call brought Grate's reign of terror to an end.
This is the one with the chilling detail about him shaving a heart shape into her pubic hair, right? I mean, what kind of twisted mind is this?
Yeah, it's a disturbing detail, and one that speaks volumes about Grate's need to exert power and control over his victims. It wasn't enough to just physically subdue them. He had to degrade and dehumanize them as well.
It's like he wanted to leave his mark, almost like he wanted to claim ownership of them in the most horrific way possible. So do we know how Jane Doe was able to escape that situation?
Yeah, I mean, her story is one of remarkable courage and quick thinking, She was held captive for 3 days in Grate's Ashland house, bound and repeatedly assaulted. But while Grate was asleep, she saw her chance.
So she made a run for it?
Not exactly. Remember, she was bound, but she did manage to find a phone, and she whispered this desperate plea for help to a 911 dispatcher.
Wow. I bet she was terrified, knowing he could wake up any minute. Talk about bravery under pressure.
Yeah.
Right. So she did give her location?
I think she did. Whispering so as to not wake Grate. She provided enough information for the police to locate the house.
Okay, so the cops have the address. But if they just barge in, wouldn't that have put Jane Doe in even more danger? I mean, Grate could have easily just lashed out.
Right, that's a valid concern. But thankfully, the police were able to arrive while Grate was still asleep, completely unaware that his world was about to come crashing down.
Man, what a moment that must have been for him. To go from feeling completely in control to suddenly being at the mercy of law enforcement. I bet the look on his face was priceless.
I doubt there was much satisfaction to be found in that moment. You see, inside that house, the police discovered not only Jane Doe, but also the bodies of two other women, Stacey Stanley and Elizabeth Griffith.
Oh, right. It wasn't just Jane Doe. This was a house of horrors. Let's talk about Stacey Stanley and Elizabeth Griffith. Who were they? How did they end up in Grate's clutches?
So, Stacey Stanley, she also went by the name Stacey Hicks. She was 43 years old.
Yeah.
And Elizabeth Griffith was 29. And they were both found, strangled to death in Grate's home. Their stories, like Jane Doe's, really highlight the vulnerability of women on the margins of society.
Yeah, it's a sad reality, isn't it, that serial killers often target people who are less likely to be missed, people whose disappearances might not raise immediate alarm bells. That makes you wonder if these tragedies could have been prevented, if society did a better job of protecting its most vulnerable members.
Yeah, that's a really complex question with no easy answers. But it's worth noting that both Stanley and Griffith had histories of drug use and were struggling financially. And these factors, unfortunately, can make individuals more susceptible to exploitation and violence.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking to think that their struggles may have made them targets. Grate also admitted to killing Candace Cunningham, a former girlfriend, and Rebecca Lacey, whose death was initially ruled a drug overdose. Seems like Grate's motives were often murky, even to himself.
Yeah, and with Cunningham, he just referred to her as a problem. And with Lacey, he just claimed that she stole $4 from him. So these flimsy justifications really point to some sort of deeper psychological drive, perhaps a need to exert power in a life where he felt powerless.
It's almost like the act of killing itself was the main objective, and he just grasped at any excuse, no matter how trivial, to rationalize it.
Yeah, that's a chilling but very plausible theory. It raises the question, was there anything that anyone could have done to stop him? Or was he, as some criminologists believe, predisposed to violence from an early age?
Yeah, and speaking of predispositions, right, let's go back to those letters he wrote from prison, blaming his crimes on government assistance. It sounds like classic manipulation to me.
Yeah.
Trying to shift the blame onto his victims and the system.
Oh, for sure. It's definitely a bizarre attempt at justification. In one letter, he even complained about receiving a $197 food card, claiming he wasn't getting enough support. So it's really hard to see this as anything more than just a desperate attempt to avoid accountability.
But there's got to be more to it than just deflecting blame, right? What's the underlying psychological mechanism at play here? Is he delusional? Is he trying to convince himself?
Right.
Or is it purely for the benefit of others?
I think it's likely a combination of factors. These letters really offer a glimpse into his warped worldview, a reality where he sees himself as the victim, justified in taking the lives of those he perceived as already dead, because they received government aid.
So he constructed this alternate reality where his actions makes sense. It's a chilling reminder of how serial killers can just twist logic and manipulate facts to fit their own distorted narratives.
Yeah, precisely. It's not about rational argument. It's about maintaining that sense of self-righteousness, even when faced with overwhelming evidence to the contrary.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener. We've uncovered not just the facts of Grate's crimes, but also the disturbing psychology that drove him. It's a stark reminder that evil can really lurk beneath a veneer of normalcy.
Yeah, for sure. And it really underscores the importance of understanding the risk factors and warning signs associated with these types of offenders, not to create fear or prejudice, but to empower individuals and communities to
protect themselves. So what are some of those red flags? What should people be aware of?
Well, I mean, it's never possible to predict with certainty who will become violent, but certain patterns often emerge, and we've already discussed Grate's troubled childhood, the neglect, the periods of withdrawal, and these can be indicators, not guarantees, of future problems.
Okay, so a difficult childhood can be a factor, but obviously not everyone who experiences trauma becomes a serial killer. What else should we be looking for?
Well, Another key indicator is a lack of empathy. Serial killers often struggle to understand or even care about the feelings of others. They see people as objects, as obstacles to be overcome, rather than individuals with their own hopes and dreams and vulnerabilities.
Yeah, that makes sense. If you can't empathize with your
Yeah.
victims, it's easier to dehumanize them
Yeah.
and to
Justify your
actions. Right. So were there any signs of this lack of empathy in Grate's past?
Well, the sources we have don't go into a ton of detail about his interpersonal relationships, but his ex-girlfriend did describe him as emotionally distant and prone to those periods of isolation that we talked about earlier. So it's possible these were early signs of an inability to connect with others on a meaningful level.
That's fascinating. It seems like these seemingly insignificant details from his past could hold the key to understanding the monster he became.
It's like putting together a puzzle. Each piece on its own might not reveal much, but when you start connecting them, a clearer picture starts to emerge.
So we have the troubled childhood, the lack of empathy. What other pieces of the puzzle are there?
Another common trait among serial killers is this need for power and control. They often feel powerless in their own lives, so they seek to exert control over others through manipulation, violence, and domination.
Yeah, and that certainly fits with Grate's MO, right? He bound his victims, moved them from place to place, and even went to the disturbing lengths of shaving a heart shape into Jane Doe's pubic hair. It's like he wanted to leave his mark, assert his dominance over them.
Exactly. These acts aren't just about physical control, right? They're about psychological manipulation and degradation. It's about breaking down the victim's sense of self and establishing absolute power over them.
It's a horrifying thought to be so completely at the mercy of someone like that. It makes you wonder if anything could have been done to prevent these tragedies, or was Grate just destined to become a killer?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And there is no single answer. There's no magic formula to explain the origins of evil. It's often a complex interplay of factors: genetics, environment, personal experiences, and choices that all converge in this perfect storm of tragedy.
So it's not just about having a bad childhood or struggling with empathy. It's about how all of these factors interact and shape an individual's trajectory.
Precisely. You see, human behavior is incredibly complex. We can't simply point to one variable and say, this is what caused it. It's about understanding the interplay of nature and nurture, the choices people make, and the circumstances they find themselves in.
Okay, so predicting who will become a serial killer is nearly impossible. But can we do anything as a society to prevent these crimes from happening?
That's a crucial question. And while there are no easy answers, there are steps we can take. I mean, early intervention is key. Providing support for children experiencing trauma or abuse can help address those feelings of isolation and rage before they fester and manifest in destructive ways.
It sounds like it's about addressing the root causes, right? Not just reacting to the symptoms. What else can be done?
Well, we need to foster empathy and understanding, teaching our children to value and respect others, to see beyond differences, and to recognize the shared humanity that binds us all, can help create a more compassionate and less violent world.
That makes a lot of sense. It's not just about
criminals.
Right. It's about creating a society where those crimes are less likely to occur in the first place.
Exactly. It's a multifaceted approach: prevention, intervention, and fostering a culture that rejects violence and embraces compassion. It's a long-term effort, but it's essential if we want to build a safer and more humane world.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from great troubled past to the harrowing details of his crimes and the disturbing psychology that drove him. It's a lot to process.
It is, but it's important to engage with these complex issues, to understand the darkness that exists in the world, not to be consumed by it, but to be empowered to fight against it.
Well said. Before we wrap up, I want to touch on Grate's trials and sentencing. What happened after his arrest?
Well, Grate's case was a real legal labyrinth, spanning multiple jurisdictions and involving just a litany of charges. Initially, he pleaded not guilty, but later changed his plea to guilty for some of the charges, including The murders of Stacey Stanley and Elizabeth Griffith.
So he admitted to those murders.
He did, but even in his confessions, there was still this element of manipulation, this desire to control the narrative. He often attempted to portray himself as the victim, claiming that his actions were somehow justified, or that he wasn't in control of his
behavior, playing a game almost, right? Trying to manipulate the system, even as he face the consequences of his actions.
That's a common tactic among narcissists, a personality type often observed in serial killers. They crave attention and validation, even a negative attention, and will manipulate situations. And to maintain that sense of...
So what was the outcome of the trials?
Well, Grate was convicted on multiple counts of aggravated murder, kidnapping, rape, and abuse of a corpse. And he was ultimately sentenced to death for the murders of Stanley and Griffith. And he's currently on death row in Ohio. However, due to the state's ongoing struggle to obtain lethal injection drugs, his execution is on hold.
So he's in this strange limbo, right? Sentenced to death. But with no clear path to execution. It raises a lot of questions about the death penalty itself, its effectiveness as a deterrent, the moral implications of taking a life, even the life of someone who has committed such horrific acts.
Yeah, you're right. It's a very complex issue with no easy answers, and it's one that deserves thoughtful consideration and debate. But perhaps that's a conversation for another deep dive.
Agreed. We've already given our listeners a lot to digest today. But before we conclude, there are still two victims whose stories we haven't explored in detail yet: Candace Cunningham and Rebecca Lacey.
Right. Their stories deserve to be heard, and we'll delve into the specifics of their cases and Grate's eventual pleas in the final part of this deep dive.
We're back and ready to finish up our deep dive into the case of Shawn Grate. We've really gotten into, his troubled past and the awful details of his crimes, and even the disturbing psychology that drove him to do all this. But there are two victims we haven't really explored yet: Candace Cunningham and Rebecca Lacey.
You're absolutely right. It's important to give each of Grate's victims their due, to acknowledge their individual stories and not let them just be overshadowed by this larger narrative.
Right. So let's start with Candace Cunningham. Now, she was a former girlfriend of Grate's. Is that
Yes, that's right. And her murder really stands out. I mean, just for the sheer brutality of it all. Grate actually admitted to torturing Cunningham for 3 days before finally taking her life. Back in June of 2016, her body was found behind a burned-out house in Richland County.
3 days of torture. That's hard to even fathom. What was his motive? I mean, was this a crime of passion? Was it jealous rage?
Well, Grate's explanations, as with many of his crimes, they were pretty vague and often contradictory. He sometimes just referred to Cunningham as a problem, hinting at some sort of conflict or obstacle she presented. But his true motives, they really remain shrouded in mystery.
Yeah, it's frustrating, isn't it? We want to understand the why behind these horrific acts, but sometimes those answers just aren't there. Or maybe maybe they're buried so deep within the mind of a killer that even they can't access them.
Yeah. That's the challenge we face when dealing with these types of cases. We can analyze the evidence, we can study the psychology, but ultimately we may never fully comprehend the darkness that drives a person to commit such heinous acts.
So we have Candace Cunningham, a victim of great, brutal rage, and seemingly probably inexplicable motives. What about Rebecca Lacey? Her case was a bit unusual, wasn't it?
Yeah, Rebecca Lacey's death was initially ruled a drug overdose, and it wasn't until Grate confessed to killing her, more than a year later, that the investigation was actually reopened.
Wow, so he confessed to a murder that had basically gone unnoticed.
Yeah.
That had been dismissed as an accidental overdose. That's chilling. What was his motive in that case?
Well, Grate claimed that he strangled Lacey after she stole $4 from him at his place of work.
$4? You go a woman's life for $4. I mean, that's almost beyond comprehension.
I know. It does seem like a shockingly trivial motive for such a brutal act, but it actually aligns with what we've seen in other serial killer cases. The act of killing itself, the exertion of power and control, often becomes the primary objective. And the justifications, no matter how flimsy, they're really just secondary.
So these weren't crimes of passion or revenge. They were calculated acts of violence.
Yeah.
Driven by some deeper, more sinister need.
Yeah.
It's a terrifying thought.
It is, and it really highlights the importance of not just focusing on the why of these crimes, but also understanding the psychology of the perpetrators, the warning signs, and the steps we can take as a society to prevent future tragedies.
So Grate confessed to these additional murders. What happened next?
Well, because these crimes took place in a different county, Grate ended up facing separate trials for the murders of Cunningham and Lacey.
Man, I can only imagine the emotional toll these trials took on the families of the victims.
Yeah.
To have to relive the trauma, to face the man responsible for their loved one's death. That must have been incredibly difficult.
Oh, absolutely. The pursuit of justice can be a long and arduous process, and it often comes at a great personal cost to those who've already suffered so much. But it can also be a path to healing, a way to honor the memories of those who are lost, and to ensure that their voices are heard.
So, what was the outcome of these trials? Was justice served?
Well, in both cases, Grate pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for Lacey's murder, and received an additional 17 years to life for the charges related to Cunningham's death. And these sentences were to be served consecutively with his existing death sentence for the murders of Stacey Stanley and Elizabeth Griffith.
So even if Ohio were to reinstate the death penalty, Grate would still spend the rest of his natural life behind bars.
Yes, that's correct. He's been held accountable for his
Right?
actions and will never again be able to harm another person. And, that's a small measure of solace for the families of his victims.
This deep dive into the case of Shawn Grate has been a harrowing journey, to say the least. We've encountered darkness, prosody, and a level of human cruelty that's really difficult to comprehend. But we've also seen, courage, resilience, and the unwavering pursuit of justice. So what final thoughts would you leave our listeners with?
Well, I think it's crucial to remember that, even in the face of such darkness, there's always hope. Hope that we can learn from these tragedies. Hope that we can work to prevent future violence.
Yeah.
And hope that we can build a world where every human life is valued and protected.
Yeah.
Let's honor the memories of Shawn Grate's victims by striving to create that world, a world where such horrors are no longer possible.
That's a powerful message, and one that we should all carry with us. So to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this difficult but important journey. May we all work together to build a brighter and more compassionate future, one where stories like Shawn Grate's are relegated to the history books, a reminder of the darkness we've overcome and the lessons we've learned along the way.